Welcome to episode 6 of a Northern Counties Paranormal podcast, hosted by Within the Boggart Wood. Today I'd like to start the episode with a shout out to a wonderful podcast called The Whispering Woods. The Whispering Woods is hosted by Sarah and her son Toby and delves into ghosts and folklore from across the globe. Here's their trailer.
Hello and welcome to The Whispering Woods podcast. I'm Sarah and this is my 12-year-old son, Toby.
I've had that with sleep paralysis.
What, a goblin?
Nah, it's just a creature.
Okay, but that was a bit of a bad stutter. Sometimes I want to hug him. Sometimes I want to scream at him. But mostly, I just want to scare him stupid. The legend of the Navajo Skinwalker. Because that's the kind of mum I am. Join us every Sunday as I tell true tales of the paranormal in an attempt to terrify my youngest child. This type of being operates by an entirely different set of rules. Will it work? Subscribe and find out wherever you get your podcasts.
If you like the sound of that, please look them up on your favourite podcasting platform. Today's first story is the Ghost of Glassensikes. On the 2nd of March 1653, the body of an unidentified person was found drowned in the River Skerne, Darlington, within an area called Glassensikes. In the 17th and 18th century, Glassensikes was an area of partially enclosed marshy ground bounding the west bank of the Skerne, fed by a small burn. It also held an open stell, which was a Scottish and North East English term for an enclosure for sheep or cattle. The area was wooded, apart from the stell and some parcels of land, and descriptions from the time suggest that the area was dank and murky. For reference, Glassensikes was the area now the A167 on the southwestern outskirts of Darlington, between South Park and Blackwell Grange. I'll put a link in the episode description on the main website for those that are interested. The finding of the body in 1653 appears to be the starting point for the local folk regarding the area as haunted. One of the characteristics of the humanoid sightings was that both the ghost of the White Lady and also gentleman were both said to be headless, potentially immortalising the cause of the death in 1653 in story. However, like most of these tales, the sightings began to evolve, and by the late 18th century it developed into the story of a Barguest. A Barguest was said to be a form of goblin that acted as a harbinger of impending calamity, howling before midnight the day before a tragedy would occur. Described in 1886 as a local spirit or demon, Brockie suggested the name Barguest derived from the Danish bow, or bier, which was the wooden frame used to carry the dead to their graves. In folklore, the most common shape of a Barguest was that of a black dog, the goblin also being referred to as a padfoot further to the west and south. By the mid-19th century, these stories had gathered a certain local notoriety, and were included by Longstaff in his 1854 of the History and Antiquities of the Parish of Darlington. In it he wrote, "Headless gentlemen who disappeared in flame, headless ladies, white cats, white rabbits, white dogs, black dogs, shapes that walk at dead of night and clank their chains." In fact, all the characteristics of the northern Barguest were seen to be in full perfection at Glassensikes. It is true that these awful visions occasionally resolve themselves into a pony, shackled in an adjoining field, or Stamper's white dog, or a pair of sweethearts under the cold moon. But still a vast amount of credible evidence exists about the fallen glories of the night-roaming ghost of Glassensikes. The Glassensikes witnesses are not all thoughtless and superstitious men. An old gentleman of Darlington was, at the witching hour of midnight, returning from Oxeneyfield. It was a bright moonlit night, and the glories of the firmament led him, as he says, to possess a more contemplative turn of mind than he had ever felt before or since. In such a frame he thought that if nothing was to be seen in the day, nothing could well haunt Glassensikes by night, and in firm faith, but without any wish to exercise an idle curiosity, he determined to look into it very narrowly, and satisfy himself as to the fallacy of the popular notion. Accordingly, when he came to the place where the road to Harewood Hill now turns off, he looked back and was greatly surprised to see a large animal's head popped through the stile at the commencement of the footpath, leading by the present woodside to Blackwell. Next came a body, Lastly came a tail. Now my hero, having at first no idea that the unwelcome visitant was a ghost, was afraid that it would fly at him, for it bounced in the middle of the road and stared intently at him, whereupon he looked at it for some minutes, not knowing well what to do, and beginning to be somewhat amazed, for it was much larger than a Newfoundland dog, and unlike any dog he had ever seen, though well acquainted with all of the canine specimens in the neighbourhood. Moreover, it was as black as a hound of hell. He thought it best to win the affections of so savage a brute, so cracked his fingers invitingly at it, and practised various other little arts for some time. The dog, however, was quite immovable, and stared ferociously, and as a near approach to it did not seem desirable, he turned his back and came to Darlington, as mystified about the reality of the Glassensikes ghost as ever. Of late years, this harmless sprite has seemingly become disgusted with the increased traffic past its wonted dwelling, and has become a very well-behaved domestic creature. The stream, however, loves to make new ghosts, and by its stagnant nature does everything in its power to obtain them. Longstaff and others also describe other phenomena in the area, with will-o'-the-wisps being seen, and occasionally the Blackwell Grange hedge would be engulfed in unearthly flames. There had also been sighting of a further headless man ghost by the Nordykes plantation at Blackwell, though Longstaff suggested he had not been seen for some years by 1854. Today's archive story looks at the little-known case of the Bronte Street haunting in Gateshead, told through articles in the Evening Chronicle. The first article is dated Tuesday 10th of December 1963 and reads, "A service of blessing will be held in a Gateshead house tonight to evict an unwelcome poltergeist. The Reverend R. Race of St. James's Church, Gateshead, told the Evening Chronicle that he had his bishop's permission to hold the service in Mrs. Eva Coulthard's home in Bronte Street. Mrs. Coulthard, a 36-year-old widow with 3 children, refused to sleep in her house at night because of noises made by what she thinks is a ghost. Mr. Race said, 'I shall say prayers in every nook and cranny of the house. It will not be a service of exorcism. That will be the final resort if all else failed.' Today Mrs. Coulthard was having a meal with 2 of her children in the house. She has lived there for more than 11 years. But she is at present being looked after by her next-door neighbours, Mr. Frank Hay and his wife. Mr. Hay said, 'My hair sometimes stands on end when I go into Mrs. Coulthard's house.'" The second article is dated 6 days after the first, on Monday 16th of December 1963. "The Coulthards of Bronte Street, Gateshead, are listening for their poltergeist again. They have heard it twice since a clergyman blessed their house a week ago, but has been silent for the last 4 days. Mrs. Eva Coulthard, the widowed mother of 3 children who lives there, last night said, 'We have heard it twice since Mr. Race held the service, but it was fainter. There was only 1 knock instead of the usual 2. We are all hoping that it has now finally gone after 4 days' silence. I am trying to get used to moving around the house in the dark again, but everybody's nerves are still on edge, especially the children's. Since the service, Mrs. Coulthard has received several letters with suggestions on how to get rid of the ghost. Many have been from religious sects and from people who have had similar experiences. The most concrete offer was from someone actually willing to accommodate Mrs. Coulthard and her family. If it does start again like it was before the service, I won't stay here. I shall leave the house as soon as I can," she said. The final article is dated the following year on Saturday 4th of January 1964, so 2 months after the initial articles. "The ghost of Bronte Street, Gateshead, thought to have been banished at a service of blessing in the house, made a dramatic return to first foot its unwilling hostess. Mrs. Eva Coulthard, who had not heard anything of the poltergeist since the Reverend Race of St. James's Church held a service in her council home on December the 10th, was entertaining neighbours on New Year's Eve. Then on the stroke of midnight, the first-footing ghost arrived. Slippers shot from the floor, knocking down Christmas decorations. Plates and cutlery crashed down and chairs moved. Mrs. Eva Coulthard, who with her 3 children now refuses to live in the house, told the Evening Chronicle, 'When this trouble first started I was frightened. Now I am terrified. Things are getting worse.' Neighbours who once chuckled at the ghost no longer find it funny. Many of them now had experience of the poltergeist, which is becoming more vicious with each incident. A man visiting the house to empty the television meter saw a chair move. While he was putting the meter back into the set, an ornament flew off the mantel shelf, narrowly missing his head. On another occasion, a milk bottle smashed against a door, and Mrs. Coulthard's furniture is now showing many marks caused by the poltergeist. Chairs have been thrown against the sideboard, and a heavy fruit bowl splintered a fireplace tile. Said Mrs. Coulthard, "I am living away from the house now. I've asked the council for another, but they have told me there is nothing they can do. A lot of people have now seen what is happening, but no one can explain it. It seems intent on wrecking the house. Each day I throw more litter into the dustbin. There is nothing I can do." Today's third story again comes from the Ilfracombe Chronicle, which I found when I was researching the Coulthard case. This article dates to the 25th of February 1977 and reads, "A Tyneside couple talk today of the poltergeist which brought terror to their home. Their ordeal began when a toy donkey glided, unaided, down the stairs. Then a doll jumped from one shelf to another in the dining room of John and Lillian Price's terraced house in Ilfracombe Gardens, Whitley Bay. It was the start of 2 weeks of fear for the family, which only abated this week when a priest and Baptist minister carried out a ceremony at the house. In the 2 weeks, the poltergeist caused at least a dozen happenings. It was hell on earth. We were terrified. We slept in our clothes for a week because we didn't know what was going to happen next," said 57-year-old Mrs. Price. Mr. Price, aged 59, said, "It was a terrible ordeal, but things seem to have quietened down since the priest blessed our home. The incidents included a piece of glass which moved 4 times in the bedroom and bathroom, a clothes horse which fell against a wardrobe and was later found on another wall of the landing, clothes emptied from dressing table drawers and were later replaced in other drawers, a shelf rack which fell, bringing down a collection of dolls even though nails attaching it were left intact in the wall, an electric blanket was switched on, plugs kept being put in, and a quilt and other bedding was moved about. But the most frightening occasion was when a heavy chest packed with blankets was thrown against the bedroom door, locking the couple's grandson, Robert, in the room. Father John James of St Cuthbert's Roman Catholic Church, North Shields, visited the Price home after the disturbances. I comforted the family and blessed the house," he said today. "In particular, I blessed the rooms where most of the disturbances happened. I blessed the people in the house and said a few prayers. There was definitely something happening there, and the family were very upset, but I don't know what were the actual causes." When looking through my own archives for something a little different to add to this podcast, I found a small number of stories that had been submitted during an event recorded by me in 2010 at Dilson Castle near Corbridge. I'll include 3 of these stories now from John and Madeline Bell.
Right, well, it's John and Madeline Bell. We live in Newcastle, and we were having a weekend away in Thoresby Hall in Yorkshire. I take 2 types of medication in white, bubble wrap white, and one of them I put in red letters. I put L and B for lunch and breakfast. When we got to the room, one of the standard lamps was broken, so we reported it, and we unpacked and I left my tablets under the lamp. When we got back from dinner, the lamp had been repaired and my tablets were missing. Well, they're quite important, so my wife and I looked everywhere, under the beds, behind the cupboards, in the drawers even. We emptied a suitcase and my briefcase. This particular packet with the red lettering on was nowhere to be seen. So I was thinking, well, I'll have to, in the morning, go down to the nearest town, trying to get a pharmacist to give me some more. Woke up in the morning, went across to the table lamp where the tea stuff was laid out, and there were my pills back. Exactly where I'd left them, and they certainly hadn't been there the night before. I got talking to one of the cleaners in the hotel, and she said that there were things like that happening. A little boy apparently had fallen off the roof at the front entrance and been killed, and it was believed by the staff that he was the one who came along and removed stuff and replaced it. That was it really. But years later we went back to Thoresby Hall, and we met a man there he was a psychic who'd taken a job as a night porter or night receptionist because of his interest in the place. And he said that it was quite common to have this sort of experience there, including he saw the spectre of the man who built the place and who was very loath to leave because he loved it so much.
And this is going back many years to when I was a young girl of about 12 years old. We lived in an old Victorian house in London, Shepherd's Bush actually. And one night I'd gone to bed. I was just sort of laying quietly. I'm not quite sure whether I was fast asleep, but something woke me up, which I thought we had one of those old wardrobe cupboards that old houses have in bedrooms, and someone went to the cupboard and opened it, and I remember calling out, "Is that you, Mummy?" No answer. But I just drifted back and went back to sleep. But the funny thing about it is, I wasn't frightened. I didn't say anything about it to my mother. But many years afterwards, I was nearly grown up, my mother told me that the lady that lived on the top floor of our house would never sleep in the back bedroom, where there was also one of those cupboards, when her husband was on night work, because she saw a little old man in a nightshirt go to the cupboard and frantically look for something, you know. And I thought, well, that's it. That must have been the little man looking for something.
I was at school, finished at school, and I was waiting to go for national service. And it was a very, very hot summer's night, and I'd written a letter to my parents who were abroad working, and I couldn't sleep. It was very, very hot, so I thought I'd go to the village and post the letter. When I came out of the main door, and across grass that led to the exit of the driveway, it suddenly everything went very still and quiet and cold, and I heard a whispering noise all around me. Well, there was a big lake the other side of this grass stretch, and I, for some reason, thought it was maybe frogs had hatched and were hibernating. So rather than tread on them, I went back to my room. And I was talking to one of the school maids the next morning, and she said, "Oh no," she said, "you've heard the ghost of Rupert's army that was retreating from Edge Hill, and they went through the grounds here on their way." Well, I've done research and did find that General Waller's army had camped in that area, and she assured me that this was quite often heard in the village, a place called Hanwell, not uncommon at all. So that was my experience there.
I'll finish this episode with a whimsical article which I found in the Kelso Chronicle dated March 1845. The Air Observer mentions that the inhabitants of Beth and the neighbouring parishes have been so thoroughly alarmed by a supposed ghost that 2 of them are still confined to bed. The ghost was captured on Saturday night and proved to be a stout young fellow in the prime of his life. Some doubts are entertained as to his sanity. Thank you for listening to episode 6. As per usual, more details on the Within the Boggart Wood project, including social media and Patreon links, can be found on the main website at theboggartwood.uk. If you'd like to send me any stories to read out on the podcast, links can be found on the main website, or stories can be sent directly to theboggartwood@gmail.com. I've also set up a Facebook group this week simply entitled Within the Boggart Wood, so if anybody fancies joining and getting some discussions going, all are welcome. So until next time, have a good week and stay safe.